everyone to be here in this panel. I'm very grateful and happy to be here, and I thank to the organization to accept our panel that we will discuss about the cluster in Portuguese Empire. Today we have Professor Antônia FIALHO Conde that will be our discussant, and I will introduce her, and then she will start the moderation of our panel. Professor Antônia FIALHO Conde, PhD in Early Modern History, is professor in History Department and at the University of Évora. Researcher in CIDERUS, where she coordinates the research group to heritage literacies and cultural diversity. She collaborates also with SECOR and CARR. Her research interests are located in history of Portugal, early modern period, history of Cistercian monasticism, historic and cultural heritage, and metro culture, areas where she has been publishing several works, directing and collaborating on national and international funded research projects, and guiding several theses and dissertations. She is director of Master in Management and Valorization of Historical and Cultural Heritage, and vice-coordinator of the Master Erasmus Mundus TPTI, Techniques, Patrimoine, Territoire, the Industry, Histoire, Valorization, Didactic, sorry by my French, in partnership with the Universities of Évora, Paris I Sorbonne, and Padua. Thank you, Professor Antônia. You can start now.
And thank you very much. I'm really very glad to be here sharing this space with my colleagues and with the team that I particularly like. We can say that this panel is dedicated to female convents in the Portuguese Empire. From Portuguese islands of Azores and Madeira, we can see these communications at the feminine religious form of life was a reality from India and Macau to Brazil, and that Atlantic or Indic were not a frontier. They act like bridges between physical or intangible worlds, connecting peoples, Catholic confession, secular and regular clergy, central or regional regulations, internal or external power networks, recognizing a central power, the Portuguese crown. Presenting the panel, I can say that we have the participation of Amanda Oliveira Costa, that has a PhD in social history from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and that will speak firstly. She has some books published as the Convent of Nossa Senhora de Conceição da Ajuda in Rio de Janeiro as a social and religious institution, 1705-1762. She has also experience in the area of history with an emphasis of modern history in the 18th century, working mainly on the following themes: convents and women's gatherings, ecclesiastical sources from the 18th century, government of Dom José and Marquês de Pombal, the power of bishops in Rio de Janeiro in the 18th century. She'll talk us about Mother Abadessa, the profile of women in the convent of Nossa Senhora de Conceição da Ajuda, 18th century. The next communication, it's a joint communication made by Ana Teresa HILÁRIO and ROZELY VIGAS. ROZELY is graduated in history, master and doctorated in social history at Rio de Janeiro State University. She defended the doctoral thesis entitled Demônicas in the Val dos Lírios, from the founding saints to the rebellious nuns of the Monte Santo in Goa, from 1606 to 1738. Currently, she is postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Philosophy and Human Sciences at University of Campinas. Received this year the Prix International d'Encouragement aux Études Postdoctorales, offered by the Fonds de Dotation de l'EGAES, with the European Institute of Cultural Sciences, Padre Manuel Antunes, the International Society of Jesuit Studies, and the CIDH, Universidade Aberta. Ana Teresa HILÁRIO is a researcher assistant at CHAM, a Center of Humanities, PhD student at Faculty of Social and Human Sciences in Lisbon. She is developing the PhD thesis about earth or candid lamps, gender, regulation, and resilience in the Convent of Santa Monica of Goa, 1606-1734. Her scientific interests go mainly through the study of the 17th century, whether on Portuguese political and religious institutions in the state of India, or on their agents. Currently, she has been dedicated to the study of women's history, its place in colonial societies, and their experiences and relationships. The topic of this joint communication is connected habits, Macanese women at the Santa Monica Convent of Goa, 17th century. The third and final communication is assured by Margarida LALANDA. She has a PhD in History of Culture and Institutions, professor at University of Azores and researcher at CHAM, Center for Humanities in Portugal, as I said before. She has researched and published on various aspects of the history of society and culture during early modern history, based on the study of the Azores, mainly nuns in convents, Order of St. Clare, cultural practices, municipalism, organization of society, notarial documentation, mediations, and communication. Some studies that I can point, such as São Miguel Island Society in the 17th century, structures and behaviors, qualitative methods in religious history, reading and mediation of cloistered nuns, and questions of ethics among notaries in the Ancien Régime. Today, she will talk us about genre, powers and influences, interaction in the female monasteries of the Azores and Madeira in the modern age. So each one of these communications has till 20 minutes. At the end, I'll underline some topics as conclusion, and will dedicate the remaining time to the discussion and debate. So good luck to everybody, and please, Amanda, start.
Yes, Amanda, you.
Bom, primeiramente, bom dia e boa tarde a todas.
So first of all, good morning and good afternoon to all.
Meu nome é Amanda Dias de Oliveira Costa, sou doutora em História Social pela Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro.
My name is Dr. Amanda Dias de Oliveira Costa. I am I'm a doctor of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in Social History.
Hoje eu vou apresentar o trabalho sobre a Madre Abadessa, o perfil dessas mulheres no Convento da Ajuda no século XVIII.
Today I will present my work about Mother Abbess, the profile of these women of the Convent of Nossa Senhora of Conceição of Ajuda, 18th century.
Essa imagem é do Convento da Ajuda, que foi demolido por volta de 1911.
So this is the image of the Convent of Ajuda that was demolished in 1911
devido à reforma de Pereira Passos,
because of the reformation done by the Mayor Pereira Passos.
Essa imagem ela está disponível no site da Biblioteca Nacional Digital.
So this image was taken from the funds of the National Digital Library.
E vai nos ajudar a entender um pouco da grandiosidade desse convento.
And will help us to understand the greater and the majesty of this convent.
As fontes que utilizamos para o nosso trabalho são basicamente eclesiásticas. Nós retiramos tais fundos no Arquivo da Cúria Metropolitana do Rio de Janeiro, do Convento da Ajuda e do Arquivo Histórico Tramarina em Portugal.
So the source we use for our work are basically ecclesiastical. We have taken these funds from the files of the Metropolitan Curia of Rio de Janeiro, the Convent of Nossa Senhora da Conceição da Ajuda in Rio de Janeiro, and the History Ultramarine in Portugal.
As fontes utilizadas para análise do Convento do Desterro da Bahia foram retirados do próprio Convento do Desterro da Bahia, nos arquivos público e municipal da Bahia e da Cúria Metropolitana de Salvador.
The sources used in the analysis of the Convent of Desterro in Bahia were taken from the files of the convent itself in the public and municipal files of Bahia and the Metropolitan Curia of Salvador.
A metodologia aplicada no estudo sobre o Convento da Ajuda
The methodology applied in the study about the Convent of Ajuda
estão baseadas em nossas hipóteses norteadoras, onde tentamos estabelecer uma metodologia comparativa entre os diferentes fundos documentais a partir do método prosopográfico, a fim de construirmos uma construção do social, do político, do econômico frente a uma instituição conventual em época colonial.
So our sources are based on guide hypotheses, which we try to establish a comparative method between these different documentary funds based on the prosopographic method, in order to build an understanding of the social, political, and economic in face of a conventual institution in colonial times.
Já a metodologia aplicada no estudo do Convento do Desterro da Bahia
and the methodology that we applied in the study of the Desterro Convent in Bahia.
Acreditamos que a autora Ana Amélia Vieira Nascimento utilizou em sua pesquisa o método quantitativo, examinando o Convento do Desterro e, consequentemente, as freiras clarissas, mediante ação descritiva, exploratória, explicativa, levantamentos bibliográficos e documentais.
So we believe that the author Ana Amélia Vieira Nascimento used in her research the quantitative method, observing the Desterro Convent and therefore the Clarice nuns, through the descriptive, explanatory action, bibliographical and documentary survey.
Os processos das fundações conventuais no Brasil
The conventual foundation process in Brazil
foram bem complexos.
They were very complex.
O Brasil, nos séculos XV ao XVIII, era colônia de Portugal e, por isso, estava submetido à instituição do padroado lusitano, necessitando, sim, impedir autorização para a fundação de uma instituição religiosa, quando desejasse. E sem uma ordem régia, não se podia normalmente fundar um convento e nem sequer um educandário para meninas. Ou seja, a fundação do convento só poderia ocorrer caso interessasse a coroa.
So Brazil was under the empire of Portugal between the century 16 and 18, and for that reason it was submitted to the institution of the Portuguese patronate, thus needing to ask an authorization for the foundation of a religious institution whenever it wished. Without a royal order, it could not normally to establish a convent, not even an educator or retreat to which women would temporarily live. In other words, if the foundation of a convent did not interest the Portuguese crown, the difficulties imposed could be many.
Como destacou Yolando Aze, a resistência poderia estar na tentativa de expandir casamentos ou evitar ócios e vocações forçadas dentro desses estabelecimentos e, por fim, a preocupação com o acúmulo de riquezas dentro dessas instituições.
As Yolando Aze pointed out, resistance could be linked to the need to expand the population through marriage, trying to avoid hate and forced vocation with this type of establishment. And finally, the concern about accumulating family fortune with the convents.
A fundação do Convento do Desterro da Bahia ocorreu em 1677 e a fundação do Convento da Ajuda em 1750.
The foundation of those convents, the Convent of Desterro in Bahia took place in 1617, and the foundation of the Convent of Ajuda in 1750.
Para falarmos sobre os conflitos com os poderes civis, vamos mencionar 3 monarcas.
So to talk about the conflicts with civil and religious power, we'll be talking about 3 monarchs.
Começamos com o rei Dom João V, de Portugal, que governou entre 1706 a 1750.
So I will start with King John V, that reigned between 1706 to 1750.
Dom João V observou que não conseguiria impedir a profissão religiosa de algumas mulheres que iam a Portugal, decretando uma lei em 1732 que impediu donzelas de atravessarem o Atlântico sem a sua permissão. O interessante é que o monarca ainda incentivava o casamento entre a população e indicou que algumas donzelas iam a conventos portugueses contra a vontade, o que tornaria inconcebível tal providência.
So King John V noted that he could not prevent the religious profession of some women who were going to Portugal, endorsing a law in 1732 that prevented young ladies from crossing the Atlantic without his permission. Interestingly, the monarch still encouraged marriage among the population and indicated that some young ladies went to Portuguese convents against their wish.
Já no reinado de Dom José I e do Marquês de Pombal, entre 1750 a 1777,
so in the reigns of King José I and Marquês de Pombal was between 1750 and 1777.
a situação dos conventos e dos recolhimentos do Rio de Janeiro passou por uma mudança devido à política restritiva do Marquês de Pombal. E em sua administração, ele priorizou a manipulação frente aos domínios europeus e uma tentativa de estabelecer uma política no que se referia aos jesuítas. E, posteriormente, outras ordens religiosas. E, segundo Arnold Welling, as restrições e as irmandades eram impostas com o intuito de obter controle frente às propriedades de raiz.
So in the reign of King José the situation of the convents in Rio submit to change due to the restrictive policies of Marquês of Pombal. In his administration, he prioritized manipulation in face of European demands, and in attempts to establish a restrictive policy with regard to the Jesuits and later to other religious orders. According to Arnold Welling, restrictions on brotherhood were imposed in order to obtain control over roots properties.
Desta maneira, no que tange ao Convento da Ajuda, especificamente no decorrer dos anos de 1774 a 1768 em diante, ocorreu uma queda lenta e gradual de profissões religiosas, dando ao lugar um crescente número de educandas. E isso ocorreu devido à devassa nos costumes morais do clero e, consequentemente, do fechamento do noviciado entre esses anos, levando quase a instituição à falência.
So in regard to the Ajuda convent, especially during the years 1764 till 1778 onward, there was a slow and gradual decline in religious profession, giving rise to the growing number of students. This occurred due to the corruption moral customs of the cleric, and as a result, the closure of the novitiates, which almost led the institution to bankruptcy.
Nós vamos apresentar agora uma fonte que retiramos do convento de Santa Teresa, que mostra essa proibição a partir de 1764.
So I will be showing you a record taken from the funds of the fire of the Convent of Santa Teresa that was taken from in the year of 1764.
Esse seria o registro.
So this is the document.
A partir de agora, nós vamos falar desse reinado de Dona Maria I, entre 1777 a 1779.
So from now on, I will be talking about Queen Mary I, that reigns between 1777 to 1779.
E no governo de Dona Maria I foi sancionada uma lei em 1788, a qual moças e rapazes deveriam pedir autorização para ingressarem na religião.
Under her reign, the law in 1788 was passed, according to which girls and boys should apply for permission to join the religion.
E por volta do ano de 1789 foram estabelecidas algumas determinações que acreditamos ter influenciado a administração do Convento da Ajuda. Entre as declarações indicaríamos, os moradores das propriedades dos mosteiros e conventos não dispunham de nenhuma isenção, devendo pagar suas obrigações fiscais e paroquiais.
Around 1779, some determinations were established that we believe to have influenced the administration of the Ajuda convent. Among the statements, we would indicate that the residents of the properties of monasteries and convents did not have any exemption, having to pay the taxes and parish obligations.
E para entendermos agora os conflitos religiosos, vamos começar a falar do bispo Dom Frei Antônio do Desterro Malheiros, que teve seu bispado entre 1746 a 1773.
So to understand the religious conflict, I will be talking about Bishop Frei Antônio do Desterro Malheiros, that had his ecclesiastical government between 1746 to 1773.
Ao assumir o governo eclesiástico, Dom Desterro ditou algumas regras que, de certa forma, demonstrou o que ele esperava dos fiéis, em especial das religiosas do Convento da Ajuda. Inicialmente, ele proibiu atos profanos em festas religiosas, obrigou alguns senhores de escravos a tratá-los bem, como cristãos, forçou os capelães a ensinarem a fé católica e a doutrina cristã aos religiosos, incentivou a formação do estabelecimento do Convento da Ajuda e, mais adiante, lançou a pedra fundamental do Convento de Santa Teresa, bem como ajudou algumas igrejas com dificuldades. No lado espiritual, foi bem endurecido com a comunidade, verificando os sacramentos e as irregularidades quanto às normas.
So when assuming the ecclesiastical government, Bishop Desterro dictated some rules that in a way demonstrated what he expected from the faithful, especially from the religious of the Convent of Ajuda. Initially, he banned profane acts at religious festivals, forced some slaveholders to treat them as well as Christians, forced chaplains to teach the Catholic faith and Christian doctrine to religious, encouraged the formation and establishment of the Convent of Ajuda, and later on laid the cornerstone of the Convent of Santa Teresa, as well as helping some churches with difficulties. On the spiritual side, he was well hardened with the Catholic community, checking the sacraments and regularities, as well as the norms.
Já no bispado de Dom José Joaquim Justiniano Mascarenhas Castelo Branco, entre 1773 a 1805,
In regard to the ecclesiastical government of Bishop José Joaquim Justiniano Mascarenhas Castelo Branco between 1773 to 1805,
o próprio bispo, né, foi o primeiro e único brasileiro a ocupar o governo eclesiástico no Rio de Janeiro, em 1773, sendo sucessor do Dom Desterro. Estimulou os jovens a procurar a vida religiosa, incentivou o estudo da disciplina da moral e dos bons costumes e passou às freiras da Ordem Carmelita de Santa Teresa do Rio de Janeiro algumas cartas.
Amanda,
so the bishop,
Oi? Sim?
you have 5 minutes.
so this is
Pode
the
continuar.
So the bishop was the first and the only Brazilian to occupy the ecclesiastical government in Rio, and he encouraged the young people to study the study of disciplines of moral and good customs.
Eu vou passar direto para as tabelas, fazendo uma análise comparativa, depois nós podemos conversar sobre o bispado da Bahia, tá bom?
So I will be sharing the tablets about the Mother Abbess, and then afterwards we can talk about the bishops.
Nós temos aqui a hierarquia social do Convento do Desterro, da Bahia.
So here you have the social hierarchy in the Desterro Convent.
Aqui seria a hierarquia social do Convento da Ajuda.
This is the social hierarchy in the Convent of Ajuda.
Nós temos aqui a hierarquia administrativa do Convento do Desterro da Bahia, como Madre Abadessa, Madre Vigária e Mestre de Noviças.
You have the administrative hierarchy in the Convent of Desterro as Mother Abbess, Mother Vicar.
Essa aqui seria a hierarquia administrativa do Convento da Ajuda.
And this one is the administrative hierarchy in the Convent of Ajuda.
Aqui é a tabela com o nome, cargo e tempo de governo das abadesas do Convento da Ajuda.
And this is the tablet of the Mother Abbess of the Convent of Ajuda, with the name, office, and the government time.
E são as abadesas do Convento do Desterro da Bahia, como nome, cargo e tempo de governo.
And this one is the tablet of the Abbess of the Mother Abbess of Bahia, the Desterro Convent.
E aqui as características dos dotes, tanto do Convento da Ajuda, como do Convento do Desterro da Bahia.
And these are the characteristics of the nuns of the Convent of Ajuda.
Do Convento do Desterro.
And also the Convent of Desterro.
E nós entendemos que as funções das freiras na sociedade.
So the nuns' functions in society.
Que as mulheres da sociedade colonial, em especial do Rio de Janeiro, elas tinham um perfil de esposas e mães, e caso isso não fosse possível, em principal as mulheres da elite, deveriam virar religiosas para manter um status social.
So women in the colonial society, especially in Rio, had the profile of wives and mothers. If these were not possible, especially the elite women, they should become religious to maintain the social status.
E com base nisso, nós refletimos que o papel das freiras era de ser mulheres honradas, devotas e espirituais. E perante a sociedade, as freiras eram mulheres destinadas a ter uma vida totalmente voltada a Deus. E dentro da clausura, apesar de estarem subjugadas aos desmandos dos bispos, poderiam assumir uma posição importante na clausura, ajudando no gerenciamento e na administração.
So based on that, we reflected the role of nuns was to be honorable, devout, and spiritual women. Before society, the nuns were women destined to have a life totally focused on the will of God. And with the enclosure, despite being dominated the bishops' streams, they could take an important position in helping management and administration.
A freira tomar o hábito deveria constantemente orar, rezar e se confessar. E, além disso, participar regularmente no coro.
So the nuns, they were taking up the habit that should constantly pray and confess. In addition, regular participation in the chores was also important.
Isso é tudo. Muito obrigada.
So that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amanda. Now,
Thank you.
turning from the cases in America, Brazil, we are turning to Asia. So please, Rosely and Ana Teresa Hilário, you have the word now, please.
Thank you, Professor Antonia. I will share my... Okay?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Ok.
Thank you.
Ok.
I will start our presentation, then Ana Teresa can continue. Santa Monica of Goa and Santa Clara of Macau convents were for centuries the only institutions dedicated to female religious life in state of India. Founded in different contexts in the first half of 17th century, both nunneries shared some social, cultural, and religious characteristics. Studying women spaces in modern period isn't an easy task because of its documental corpus lack or irregularity. The Santa Monica, despite having been an extremely important convent for the society in East Portuguese Empire, didn't leave us an organized documentation, not even enough for us to observe and analyze in more detail the cloister daily life. Most of the information we have about this convent is from normative, apologetic, and chronicle documents. And it's also the one that has been most worked by the researchers. Ivone de Freitas Leal drew attention to the need to review all sources, reformulating the questions that have already been asked of them. So it's possible to innovate methodologically by carrying out a reinterpretation of the printed and handwritten sources written by the Augustinians. Transversal to all our research, because of the valuable information they contain, these texts reflect both the authority that was conferred on their author because they were men, and the purposes of valuing the other. Therefore, is needed a review based on the questions changing that traditional historiography has asked, but also the valorization of the subtext, questioning the transparency of the facts and the discourse's objective, following the Stephanie Kirk methodological line. In addition to this right, there are also some legislative, administrative documents and letters that help in the pursuit to better understand the non-social role. When the institutional documents don't answer the questions asked, the crossing with sources produced by the civil and religious power spheres becomes an important means to reach them. So we can perceive not only the relationship of the nunnery, but of the nunnery with the outside world, but also communities' characteristics present between the lines of permits, warrants, pastorals, offices, and letters. Documents that we get read help us to compose a greater panorama of female community. Like we said, Santa Monica and St. Clair foundations were very closely. The first was founded in 1606 under the Augustinian rules, while the second was founded in 1633 under the St. Clair first rules. and after the arrival of 6 nuns from an anonymous convent in Manila, Leonor de São Francisco, Madalena de Veracruz, Belchiora da Trindade, Margarida da Concepção, Clara de São Francisco, and Joana da Conceição. In Goa, Dom Friar Aleixo de Menezes' proposal was successively rejected and postponed by the king and viceroy council. When he occupied the position of governor and with the support of political and administrative power institutions, the Augustine ordered the beginning of the convent construction, only later reporting this situation to the king. He was the one who financed the convent construction and some dowries. On September 3, 1606, 19 women, together with the founding mothers, Soror Filipa da Trindade and Soror Maria do Espírito Santo, abandoned their temporal life, embraced a new path, and lived in community under the supervision of Friar Diogo de Santana. In turn, the foundation of the Macanese convent took place due to the intimate connection between the city and Manila. And despite the express royal prohibition against creating any other female convent in the East Portuguese possessions, this foundation in Macau is therefore a good example of the complex relationship between the border regions of the two Iberian empires. As Manuel Ole pointed out, the Iberian Union period in the border territories of Asia was marked at time by the expansive Spanish initiatives and conflicting relations with the Portuguese, at times by more diplomatic, pragmatic, and permeable relations. In this context, the religious orders opted more for internal cooperation than for national issues, such as the Spanish Franciscans, who maintained a Casa de Procuração in Macau and encouraged the foundation of St. Clair. According to Elza Penalva, the convent was built with the help of the Senate of Macau, which granted alms of 60 pardaus a month, and with the support of the viceroy, Conde de Linhares, whose intention was more focused on political and economic issues than on religious. As we can see in this graph, the numbers of processions in the first 12 years of convent's existence allow us to draw some conclusions and to perceive the difference between both institutions. First, it's clear that the Goan convent started with a very high number of solemn professions compared to Macau, in a difference of 21 women in Goa to 9 in Macau. Secondly, we note that in 5 years there were no entries in St. Clair, which was not registered in St. Monica. Finally, we emphasize that in these 12 years, there were a very different total of entries, from 23 in Macau to 86 in Goa. This is not surprising if we take into account that St. Monica was considered by its contemporary to the largest convent in the entire Portuguese Empire. The Macau convent, in turn, couldn't exceed a total of 33 nuns, which only happened in 1661. In this map, think about their population. The two convents differed greatly. While Santa Monica attracted women from various locations in an extension that went from the east coast of Africa to Japan, like you can see, include territories that were not under the direct influence of the Portuguese, like Persia and Japan. St. Clair had a smaller radius of influence, receiving only women from the city of Macau itself. St. Monica's range of influence reflects the thalassocratic character of the East Portuguese Empire. Unlike the Goa nuns, most of the Macanese poor class came from families linked to the Macau-Manila trade, and the convent served a very local interest. The nuns were Luso-Asiatic, daughter of Portuguese merchants who settled in the city, forming families through marriage or concubinage with Chinese, Japanese, Timorese, Philippine, and other local women. At first, the Santa Monica constitutions determined that only Portuguese origin women could solemnly profess. Among them were military daughters, such as captains, or whose names were preceded by the treatment pronoun don or dona, and the daughters of the casados, Portuguese and their descendants who received royal privilege for marrying and settings in the cities. However, there were some exceptions of converted women and natural daughters who became black veil nuns. The women who entered in St. Clair Convent, on the other hand, were daughters of Portuguese established in Macau through the formation of famílias empresas, something like company families, who carried out partnerships and consortia, both of ships and capital. There are multiple ways for a convent to capture and manage the resources for its sustenance and survival. The most important was the dowry. In the first years of the Goan convent, the dowry's value of the black veil nuns was 2,000 seraphins, but in practice, they could vary greatly. So as we can see in this graph, a little more than half of the dowries followed the established value. The second largest piece was for those who entered with a smaller amount, most between 1,000 and 1,500 seraphins. In turn, the percentage of dowries above 2,000 seraphins was almost equal to that of those without dowries. The rest of them were paid with property, travel of China or Mozambique, with the combination of these with money or with services like a lawyer. So some of the nuns didn't pay a dowry because they were poor or related to the founding mothers or by Archbishop Menezes others, who was very favorable to these customs of exempting the dowries payment for those who couldn't pay it. In the studies we consulted, it wasn't possible to perceive the value established for the Macanese dowries, nor for the possible variations and exceptions noted throughout their years of operation. According to Ricardo Silva, for the poor class convents in Braga, we can say that the amounts demanded from the novices' family varied according to the religious house in question and the time when it was agreed. Quotes. What we know at this moment is that during the negotiations of the establishment of the nunnery, the city of Macau agreed to be its patron, with the condition that they receive young women without dowry. Soror Leonor de São Francisco, one of the convent's founders, willingly accepted this claim, stating that it wasn't consistent with their state, especially because they still needed the money for the convent building construction. Anna, please.
You have 5 minutes, Anna.
Okay, so I have to cut many of the texts that I had here. After all the presentations, we can go back to there.
Yes,
so I want to say, just cutting all my presentation, I want to say that in conclusion, and later we can talk about it, we would like to emphasize that we were able to perceive that despite being distant in their foundation and very different in their basis, social composition and rule to which they were subject, the only 2 female convents founded in the Portuguese East followed a very similar line in their history with regard to the objectives they fulfilled in the colonial societies in which they were inserted, as to the conflicts they had to civil and religious authorities in their origins and consequences, in the capacity of their nuns to lead moments of exercise of individual and collective power, and in some cases to produce literary, religious, and autobiographical texts capable of attracting the attention of their contemporaries and transcending geographical borders. Later, we can talk about these again with some examples that were in my text. So, as we aim to prove in our communication, the 2 convents were linked, and because of that, the name of our presentation, Connecting Habits. Between 1647 and 1668, we observed the profession of 10 women from Macau, as can be seen in the table. We were struck by the fact that at this time, the convent of Poor Clares was already been in full operation. One might think that this has to do with the small limit of 33 professed nuns, which has been imposed since the convent foundation. However, in addition to a solely demographic issue, when checking the names of these women's parents, it is possible to see that there were also economic demands. About her parents, we only obtained information about 3, whose names are highlighted. And according to Elsa Penalva, António Rodrigues Cavalinho was a councillor in Macau and participated in the city council meeting to define whether the city would become protector of the Poor Clares and help them sustain themselves. The same meeting was attended by Dom João Pereira. However, we don't know what their position would have been in the discussion about the city's support for the convent. Lopo Sarmento de Carvalho, in turn, already had a daughter at the convent of Santa Clara in Macau. Carvalho was part of the former mercantile elite in Macau, which was part of the business family of Jorge Cerqueira, his father-in-law, and who between 1630 and 1633 was Captain Major of the Macau-Manila trip. His other daughter was sent to Santa Monica years after his father's death. According to the chroniclers, she would have been elected prioress in 1696, which indicates not only how well liked she was by the community, but also her social importance, as she came from an influential family in Macau and had ties to the Goan civil power. Instead of placing their daughters in a convent in their city, these parents choose to send them to St. Monica. Therefore, taking into account that the Macanese convent was founded in a complex process of economic crisis in the city, urban development and identity affirmation of its population, placing daughters in the new convent combined this need for affirmation while responding to the demands of the in-debt families who sought to give an honorable life to their excess daughters. However, sending some of these daughters to the Goese convent certainly had economic reasons, as this would have been a more intense period of the local economy and war crisis, with the incisive presence of the Dutch. There were also socio-political reasons for the presence of these women in Goa, indicated a demonstration of the maintenance of contact and subordination to the Portuguese crown through its capital in the east. We would like to emphasize, for concluding the lack of sources for a broader perception of the social, political, and economic relationship between the two convents, and about the lives of these women in the Goese convent. And I have to finish.
Okay, you'll have a little bit of time after the discussion.
Okay.
Thank you, and Teresa and Rosalie. Now, Margarida, if you please, you can start.
Thank you very much. I'm just looking for my PowerPoint because I can't see it here. So it is open, but I simply can't see it.
Okay, you'll find it. That's okay.
Yes, I will, but I don't see it. Well, I'm just a moment, please, because well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to be in this panel. And I'm going to talk about genders, powers, and influences, interactions in the female monasteries of the Azores and Madeira in the modern age, 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. Some facets of the intersection of two worlds are analyzed here. The one of women's experiences within nunneries into Portuguese archipelagos in the North Atlantic, and the one with the outside of their sacred and then cloistered houses. Two areas of the relationship are highlighted, the one with the male gender in the convent and in the sanctuary, and the production and circulation of material goods. First of all, let's situate these archipelagos. This is the world map. We have been talking about Portugal, the mainland, Brazil with Bahia, Salvador da Bahia and Rio, with Goa, Macau, and now we are talking on Azores and Madeira. Here we can see them better. The archipelago of Madeira has two islands, Madeira, the big one, and the little one, Porto Santo, and Desertas. The archipelago of Azores has 9 islands and a link of islets. They are here, Formigas, Ontes, the northeast of Santa Maria. During the 16th and 17th centuries, in these islands, there are 19 nunneries, all of them from the order of Saint Clare. In the archipelago of Madeira, the first one that had the Portuguese presence, and that was inhabited just like Azores were when Portuguese arrived in the beginning of the 15th century. The main city, Funchal, here, has 3 convents. There is no other convent in the whole island and in the other island, 3 in Funchal. In the case of the Azores, we have 6 convents in the island of São Miguel. We have 2 female convents in the island of FIALHO. We have 6 in the island of Terceira, 4 in Angra, 2 in Praia, and we have 1 in the island of São Jorge, Velas. The towns where they are: Funchal, in the case of Madeira, Ponta Delgada, Ribeira Grande, Vila Franca do Campo, in the case of São Miguel, Angra, Praia, in Terceira, Horta, in FIALHO, and Velas, in São Jorge, are important towns and especially important harbors. And in the 15th century, all these harbors are very close to the maritime traffic that comes from the Orient, that comes from Africa, comes from Brazil, comes from Europe, comes from the Americas. So there are nunneries in main towns in important harbors. Which are the purposes of this presentation? Well, within an international conference that aims to provide a picture of the current state of scholarship in women's history and has the word intersections in it, in its title, we chose to present on this communication 3 among the given guidelines. First, interactions between gender and the sacred. 2, gender, kinship, and relationality. The third one, production, circulation, and consumption from a gender perspective. We'll also focus on a 4th perspective, which is common to this whole panel: nunneries in the Portuguese overseas empire as places of exercise of powers by women in the 16th, the 17th, and the 18th centuries. This is the presentation sequence. First of all, the frame of the female monastic reality. That are 4 short points. First of all, archival sources. The second, foundation of these convents. The third, profile and social origin of nuns. And fourth, importance of the enclosure and of religious vows. After we have seen this frame, then we'll go to the intersections of monasteries and gender peculiarities. Religious women, the sacred and the powers within monasteries. Relationship with male clergy authorities, and then relationship with lay men, not clergy, now lay. The last one, production, circulation, consumption, and mediations of nuns in society. And then we'll have some final considerations. I'm going to close my PowerPoint here, and just a moment, please. And concerning the first points. First of all, archival sources. In the archives of these insular convents, we have books with different types of records, documentation of the foundation of the house, titles of ownership of material goods, land, houses, rents, interest, obtained through dowries, donations, purchases, and exchanges. The annual receipt of the respective income in cash or in eggs, chickens, wheat, sugar, daily, weekly, and monthly expenses with the purchase of food and various payments for services, from spiritual ones, such as the celebration of masses and sermons, to works in the house and transportation of food. Inspection visits made by Franciscan male authorities or by local bishops. Succession in positions of authority, abbesses, vicars, mistresses of novices, vicar of the choir, and others, as a result of internal 3-year elections by secret ballot. Short biographies of each nun, with the dates of birth, admission to the convent, profession of solemn vows of obedience, poverty, and chastity, and confinement, the date of her death, as well as their affiliation and some of the peculiarities of their life and death, with or without fame of sanctity. In some of these monasteries, there are also original texts written by few of their nuns, with emphasis on autobiographies ordered by their confessors or spiritual directors. Second point, foundation of these convents. In the foundation of a female cloistered monastery, the objectives and their preferential recruiting public were publicized. One of these houses can be for the girls we call family daughters, another on the opposite side for the poor and honorable maidens, and others would receive young women from both of these categories. In the Azores, there are monasteries for each of these situations. In Madeira, however, all 3 are aimed exclusively at the local elite. At the same time, each social category or professional occupation among the elites of a locality or an island had its preferences regarding nunneries. The result becomes even more interesting to analyze when behaviors and strategies of some families become noticeable and differ from those of other family nuclei, as documentation already analyzed us to conclude. This is how we find, in some cases, all the female siblings of a household concentrated in the same convent, while in other families, the sisters are distributed into different houses, eventually repeating in each of them one of the two models that seem to be the most common, or two sisters in the same house, or an aunt with one or two nieces who may be sisters or cousins to each other. Either in the four Azorian islands, where there are nunneries, and in Madeira, all these houses are founded by individuals, in a great majority belonging to the local elite. Let's see the profile and social origin of nuns. Being a nun in early modern Catholic Europe, and even in non-continental places like Azores and Madeira, is an affirmation and a public recognition of high social status. Mostly of these consecrated women are the daughters, sisters, nieces, granddaughters, cousins of the men who form the administrative, political, military, economic, and social elite of the town or city where the convent is or depends on. A little amount of nuns belong to a medium social stratum. Fourth point, very, very short, importance of the enclosure and of religious vows. Enclosured life, away from the turbulence of secular world and its operating logics, is considered, after the Catholic Reform, the one and only proper space for the fulfillment of the identity vows professed by any woman willing to become a nun: poverty, obedience, and chastity. However, enclosure must be understood in specific ways, with a certain grade of permeability that is not the same in all the spaces inside the convent. And now we're going to talk about the most important part, the intersections of monasteries and gender peculiarities. Religious women, the sacred, and the powers within monasteries. There are hierarchies inside nunneries. One of them is based on the color of the nun's veil. The white one is for the minor ones, those who aren't able to rule. Only the black veil gives a nun complete power and capacity of vote and be voted for positions of governance. To participate in decisions concerning the destiny of the whole monastic community is a very important characteristic inside nun's world. The abbess is directly elected by a secret ballot by those who have been professed nuns with the black veil during at least a certain number of years and have at least a certain age. Besides some internal disputes and clashes among nuns in order to be abbess, there are also others caused by external elements. In fact, family solidarities are well documented in the bands that within the same monastery actively unite blood sisters and aunts and nieces against those bands of other nuns in favor of a practice, devotional one, or in support of an authority, or in a dispute for the election of the exercise of internal positions of responsibility and power, or, for instance, of external positions like the president of the town, leading to the existence of true dynasties of close relatives inside the convent. Sixth point, relationship with male clergy authorities. Some of the monasteries obey the bishop, others the Franciscans. In both cases, the confessors are the friars, and they enter some of the enclosure areas. The nun's dependence on the confessor means that they receive the reflections and consequences of the internal conflicts of the friars of their own order. For instance, the Franciscans in the Azores were involved in internal wars for power. At the beginning of the 18th century, they were motivated by the fact that the head of their province was located in the Terceira island, and the group that was controlling lots of convents was in São Miguel Island. The pressures of the friars over the nuns are enormous. For example, the prohibition of confession and of communion to the nuns that are confessed by the opponent of each confessor. So nuns, in this case, some nuns of a monastery write to the bishop, and they say they want to be ruled by the bishop, not by the Franciscans. Their argument is the longer duration of the position of the bishop. But the real reason is another. The reason is the bishop is far in another island, and communications are no good. They are always by boat. Sometimes they can't be made during the winter. So nuns want to choose whom to obey. They don't want to disobey. They want to choose whom to obey. So it's only to show how the relationship between convents and male authority clergy are important. There are also relationships with laymen. This is already the 7th point. And with laymen, the relationship between genders, we are going to separate in 2 parts. The first one with relatives, with members of the family. The other with other men. Relationship with laymen who are relatives to the nuns. Almost all nuns maintain close relations with their families, who continue to live very close, if not in the same town or city where the convent is located. Thus, in many cases, even taking into account the harshness and rigid hierarchy that characterize life in the convent, it will function in part as an extension of the community from which the nuns come. Although without privacy, as they depend on the knowledge and authorization of the abbess and on the watchful presence of another nun, the nuns and their close relatives converse and talk in the bars of the parlouratory or parlouratory of the monastery. They exchange correspondence and objects. They send messages. They keep each other mutually informed of personal affairs inside and outside the convent, inside and outside the family, inside and outside the town. And those of the respective communities, including interconventional, intra-monastery tensions and struggles for civil power, in which relatives are some an interested party. This does even originate within the monastery the formation of bands, as we have already seen. And they are animated by nuns of different bloodlines. Now let's see the relationship with laymen that are not from the family, assistants and professionals entering the house. There is, in fact, a great permeability and porosity between the 2 worlds below and behind the convent walls, even in terms of physical spaces. Apart from the convent that is not enclosure, Enclosure is the designation of the only exclusive area for nuns, also called strict enclosure, composed of spaces well differentiated from each other. Access, many categories of secular people, relatives, suppliers of food and materials, young men and women of errands, men of the works, servants on the nuns or of the monastery, the procurator who manages the property, doctor, friars of the same order who supervise, who inspect, supervise, visit, confess, and so on. All of them carry objects, including letters. Letters are very important, and information. Our last point, production, circulation, consumption, and mediations of nuns in society. Professor Antónia, how many minutes do I have left, please?
You have something like 2 or 3 minutes, please.
2 or 3.
Yeah.
I'll try to read what I want to. Thank you very much. The numerous autobiographies and life stories written by nuns by order of their mentors, who consider them worthy of being a model of women's lives, constitute more a way of strong communication between the consecrated and the secular world. Many of them are published due to pressure from the population outside the cloister, which, from the mid-century 17th onwards, created a real orbit of curiosity around women's convents, prodding them to writing, requesting maxims, advice, norms, and models. From there, a vast printed production will be born, whose preliminary texts denounce a relationship of expectation and return between the court and the convents. In this context, ladies of the nobility had the same spiritual directors or the same confessors as the nuns, who advised or even imposed readings, and sometimes imposed also the elaboration of personal texts for lay women, and thus also adherence to certain devotions and readings common to the conventual inter-walls and to the surrounding society, owes much to the strength of the ties between them. Naturally, the conventual daily life that emerges from these reports, including internal oppositions and conflicts suffered by several of the women in the biographies, also becomes well known to young women in secular society. And many girls are educated in monasteries from an early age, regardless of whether they come to profess or not. Besides cultural mediations, there are other links to secular society. Offers and sales of eggs, of products from the convent's garden, and from exquisite sweets, some offered to seculars and some friars, even to the monarch, as a sign of distinction, others sold abroad or consumed by themselves, and distinguished handicrafts. In the final synthesis, in the Azores and Madeira, throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, the possession of a large number of handholding properties was concentrated in the hands of a few families who married among themselves, shared the prestigious positions in the municipal councils and misericordias, commanded the defenses of militiamen and ordinances, occupied functions in the peripheral royal administration, aspired to titles of nobility or honorifics, often also profited from the export of wheat or pastel or sugar, and paid in wheat and other goods, land, income, and money, the dowries of his daughters, of their daughters, sisters, nieces, who became poor clerks. The ties between the communities of nuns and their blood families were permanently reinforced with great reciprocal influences, cultural, such as private devotions or the choice of religious or profane readings, political and power, both in elections for conventual positions and in protection of regular or secular religions, as well as in family factions that sometimes disputed in the chambers and the center and misericordias, economic, such as advice on the application of capital and interest, or on loans, inheritances, and donations of money and goods between family members. And so the establishment of a monastery with the donation of one or more properties for its construction and income for its maintenance over the centuries, and with the reservation for places for family members, simultaneously constitute a security for the soul, a way to consolidate social prestige, a spiritual and social protection for the maidens who lived in it, a guarantee both of the maintenance of certain handholdings in the family and of their inalienability, a way of keeping physically close to each other and among them the young, consecrated, unmarried relatives, a powerful and lasting interaction of the founders and their descendants with the religious community thus created and benefited. Just one more minute. Nuns, as women, are holders of not only religious power. It is a reality already proven by numerous case studies in the most recent 5 decades that consecrated women hold and exercise various powers within the convent, in elections for positions, in their exercise, in internal influence and decision-making groups, and outside it, as owners of physical assets and economic income, payers of services to build chapels and artistic pieces, influence both the behavior of lay women and the decisions of members of the political, or as spiritual mediators. We are talking about women who live in an urban environment or very close to one, in closed, cloistered communities, separated from the secular world. However, they continue with very close connections to the city or town and participate in its life, a city that is also very linked to them and the convents. It feeds the nuns. It has their relatives within itself and is the object of the nuns' prayers. Religious women have the job of praying for the city, for the society. It is their role as intermediary between God and society. The city's job is to mediate between these communities and daily life, which for them is harder because being apart, they can't earn their living. We can see in female convents in the Portuguese archipelagos of Madeira and Azores situations of intermediation and of personal strengthening inside the religious community, and the English terms agency and empowerment may be correctly used here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I must thank to you all very much for these excellent presentations. I think our panel is very well done, the work. So as we have seen in their presentation, Amanda made a brief comparison between the convent of Nossa Senhora da Ajuda in Rio de Janeiro, founded in 1750, with the convent of Desterro da Bahia, founded in 1677. She divided the work in an institutional approach, mentioning the foundation process, conflicts with civil and religious powers, the abbesses, the administrative hierarchy of convents, and the characteristics of the nuns' gifts. After, she made an approach focused on social characteristics such as the case and the relationship with the bishops. Not least, she spoke also about the sources and the methodology used for the research of these institutions. Anna, Hilário, and Rosalie presented us some mysteries connected between two institutions, the Poor Clares Convent in Macau and Monica's Convent of Goa from Sant Agostinho order, through analysis of their foundation processes and the family origin of their nuns in a period of time between 1647 and 1665. And Margarida Lalanda shared with us some facets of the interception of two worlds, as she said. That of women's experiences within nunneries into Portuguese archipelagos in the North Atlantic, and that with the outside of their sacred and enclosed houses. Two areas of relationship are highlighted in this last communication. The one with the male gender and the convent and the sanctuary, and the production and circulation of cultural and material goods. So, in conclusion, I think we can divide the presentations in two different parts. In the first, the panelists made a framework of the female monasteries in question, and in that a large geographic space as the interventions had demonstrated. They talk about sources and methodologies used in the studies and questions to be researched, and how to overcome the lack of documentation. The process of convents foundations in relationship with colonial policies and social strategies. The profile of the nuns, the family, the social and the geographic origins, the vocation or familiar imposition, and this is a quite interesting question when we are thinking about a period post the Council of Trent. And the second one was dedicated to gender and sacred interactions, and to production, circulation and consumption of cultural and material goods from a gender perspective, as Margarida told. They touch different topics as women's convents as places of exercise of power by women, the relationships with male religious powers or secular or regular powers by men, or even the civilian powers, the crown especially. The projection and rules of nuns in society as mediators, the question of autobiographies and the examples of life for all women, and also the changes between cloister and all the world outside cloister, and the very different type of changes as we have seen. Now I think we have some time to questions, and please, I ask to put them in the dialogue box, and I'll direct the questions to the panelists according, of course, with the theme of those questions. But in the meantime, while I'm waiting and I'm asking to all the colleagues in the panel, I think I'm well seeing there is no question in the box dialogue. Okay, so I can move. Okay. I have firstly a question to Armanda. Do you have, Armanda, some examples of impeachment of religious foundation by the Portuguese crown in Brazil? There were some intentions to found a house, and there was no possibility because of the crown intervention. In the other hand, I'd like to ask you, if you can, to underline, and I repeat, to underline the profile of the abbess in the Convento da Ajuda in Rio de Janeiro. Amanda, please.
Bom, primeiramente, obrigado pelas perguntas.
So first of all, thank you for the questions.
No caso do perfil das abadesas do Convento da Ajuda,
So in the case of the profile of the abbess of the Convent of Ajuda,
boa parte delas eram de origem social alta,
so most of them, they come from a high society.
eram mulheres filhas de comerciantes, filhas de homens importantes mesmo da sociedade do Rio de Janeiro.
They were women that come from a bourgeois family.
Como da família Teles de Menezes, Cordovil de Siqueira, dentre outros.
So very important families of the Brazilian society, like Teles de Menezes.
Em nossa avaliação, pouco foram, ou melhor, praticamente não tivemos abadesas de origem mais pobre.
And in our research, we didn't find any mother abbess from poor origin.
Essas mulheres geralmente assumiam o cargo de religiosas de véu preto, assim como ocorreu também no Convento do Desterro da Bahia.
So those women, they would have a role with the black veil nuns, in the same case as the Desterro convent in Bahia.
Então, pela historiografia sobre conventos e até por nossas pesquisas, ficou bem acertado a diferença social entre essas mulheres.
So throughout our research, we could really highlight the difference between those women in the convents.
E quando essas mulheres assumiam o cargo de religiosas de véu preto ou até mesmo administrativo,
so we also understood that when those women they took the role of administrative role of the black veil,
ficava em evidência a posição social a qual elas pertenciam.
So the position, the social position, was really highlighted through this role that would be taken by them.
Até mesmo porque o perfil cobrado pelo Convento da Ajuda e o Convento do Desterro também.
Also because of the profile that was requested by both at convents.
Eram de mulheres de sangue limpo.
Also, they requested that those women had pure blood.
De uma boa família.
From a good family, a traditional family.
E com bom cabedal, ou seja, que poderiam dar o dote total.
And then that they could, and also with a good dowry, that those families could provide a good dowry.
O que proporcionou ao Convento da Ajuda e o Convento do Desterro também um grande patrimônio em imóveis.
So because of that, because those women come from a high society, this helped those convents to have a huge patrimony. So they were really rich convents.
Famílias, por exemplo, que doavam mais de 12 propriedades no Rio de Janeiro para o Convento da Ajuda.
So, for example, there were families that they donated more than 12 properties for the convent in Rio.
Até mesmo sítios e fazendas.
Even farms and small farm, acreage.
No caso da intervenção nesse processo de fundação de conventos,
so in the case of the intervention in the process of the foundation of the convents,
nós observamos dificuldades a partir de 1670.
So we could 70.
1670.
Okay. So we could observe that from 1670 there were some difficulties.
porque o principal motivo era promover o branqueamento da população e o casamento dessas mulheres.
So the main goal, the aim, was to whitening the population and also that those women could get married.
A partir ao final do século XVII e início de XVIII, as preocupações eram em relação a ócios dentro dessas instituições ou até mesmo acúmulo de fortunas.
So the end of the century 17th and the beginning of the 18th, they were concerned with the accumulation of wealth in the
o que vai trazer essa resistência em fundar no Rio de Janeiro tanto o Convento da Ajuda quanto o Convento de Santa Teresa.
So because of that, there was this resistance to fund this resistance with the foundation for both convents in Rio de Janeiro, the Convents of Ajuda and Santa Teresa.
O Convento da Ajuda, por exemplo,
the Convent of Ajuda, for example,
teve bom número de patrimônios herdado pelas famílias dessas religiosas.
So this convent had inherited a good amount of patrimonies from those families.
Tanto que em 1764, o bispo Dom Desterro tentou evitar a proibição de noviciado nesse convento.
So because of that, in 1764, the Bishop Dom Desterro tried to prohibit the novitiate in these convents.
Okay. Okay, thank you for your answer. I don't know if you want to share some information more, but please be brief now.
Não, só essas informações. Se quiserem, eu também estou aqui disponível para...
Okay, Amanda, thank you.
Obrigada, thank you.
Now I ask to Ana Teresa Hilário, please. You have not of opportunity in the presentation. If you like to share with us some aspects that you think that are important, I am quite curious here about the examples of conflicts that you talk about. Please, if you want to go through this way, or you can choose. You have 5 minutes now.
Yes, give me just 1 second because my other computer turns off. So my text.
Improvisation.
Yes, but yes, I will. I thank the opportunity to talk about the life examples of our nuns. Let me just 2 seconds.
Okay. Did you? Okay.
Yes. No. So yes, it's in here. Okay, so the women of India were, in the eyes of the Europeans, even more susceptible and in need of a social framework that those born in Europe, and enclosing women, molding and correcting them, setting them as an example to the city and the empire, who then have the dual power of correcting women and through this educating the society that lived in relaxation. In this way, it is assumed as one of the objectives of the Goan convent to confuse, and I quote, the vicious turpitude of all those Gentile kings of the East. The convent of St. Clair was founded like that of the Goa after several years of requests rejected by the central government. And according to Elsa Penalva, since 1612, Friar José de Santa Maria claimed the need for an institution where women would dedicate themselves, and I quote again, to their true God, helping by the example given in the task of converting the other women of the city. So it is in here that those convents, both of them, could serve and the nuns in both of them could serve as an example for the city, for the other women who lived in those cities and in the empire.
Okay, thank you. Rosalie, I'm curious. Can we say that the behavior of the nuns in Santa Monica de Goa was always well accepted, or there were examples of rebellion, of bad relationship with the external life? Can you give us some examples, please?
Yeah, I can. It's very interesting because the friars wanted to create this image of sanctity of these women, but at the first years, they faced a conflict with the civil power, the camera and the viceroy, and but we don't have letters of them. We know that they write some letters to the king and to the others authorities, ecclesiastical authorities, to then support the nuns in this case. But in the 18th century, it's the most example of this conflict that I was studied. And it's very interesting because they go out of the convent and broke the claustral vote for 6 months. They stay outside the convent for 6 months. And this is very horrible for the society. And they, after these 6 months, they came back, and the problem was very different from the other that Margarida said, because in Goa they wanted to apart the archbishop and they stay with the Augustinians, because this new archbishop, Dom Frei Inácio de Santa Teresa, he arrived in Goa with a reformulate thoughts of these of the church in Goa. So he started to do some visits, and the nuns started to be very sad and yeah, I don't know, irritadas, I don't know, I forgot.
Angry.
Angry, thank you, with his actions. So because of that, she started to broke the community in 2 parts. And the most of the nuns go out the convent. Then they come back with the support of the Viceroy Saldanha, Saldanha, yeah. And they continues with the conflict into the cluster between the nuns that go out and come back, and the nuns that is still with the archbishop. And this conflict lasted almost 10 years, besides the 8 years after they came back. And it was a very important conflict, because they are inside a biggest conflict that it was with the archbishop and the religious orders, because his thoughts is that he needs to reformulate all religious of other actions. So they participate in this jurisdictional conflict.
Okay, thank you, Rosalie. I must thank to Francesca that put a question to the panel, and even the archipelagos are not the space to talk about this. But Margarida, can we speak about evangelization with the nuns? What can you tell us about this? And then we pass the word to Amanda and Rosalie or Anna Teresa, if you please. Margarida.
Thank you, and thank you, Francesca, for your question. We are talking of the 15th to the 18th centuries, and in those centuries, the convents we studied are of cloistered ones. They are not evangelization. That happens on the 19th century. And we didn't talk about Africa, because in Africa, there were no convents cloistered. So when we talk about evangelization, we'll talk on the end of the 19th century, during the 19th century and the end of 19th century and 20th century. That's why these nuns were cloistered, and according to Trento, according to the Council of Trent and the Catholic Reformation, they should be encloistered. I'm sorry, I think that it would be very interesting if we had informations for Africa, but Africa needed white people, and these people were not to be in convents. So Franciscans and other religious orders were there for evangelization, but not white women. And I don't know, Antónia.
Yes, I think because we can talk about active religious at the time you said, so working in schools, in hospitals, actively participating in the society, and this reality is clearly different. As it was different, the reality in Middle Age, because in Middle Age we can speak about the formation and the foundation of a house and the power of the women there, different also because the nuns and the religious women could go out of the monastery and out of the convent, even to take a property, a good, etc. But after the Council of Trent, the enclosure, it was like a forced vote that came together with the other three that all we know. So I think to the other cases that we exposed here, to Asia or America, the answer is it's the same. I don't know.
If I may say something.
Yeah, please.
Something else, especially to Francesca. In Portugal, we had the problem of liberalism that in the beginning of the 19th century turned it impossible to be a new nun. So all the nuns that existed had the freedom or to come back to their families or to stay in monastery until the last one dies. But as some of them died very late, in the 1860s, it was already possible, legal, to be a nun. So these new orders were already ready for evangelization, for schools, for nursing, and so on, but not until the end of the 18th century. Thank you for your question.
I can say something. It's interesting because they aren't in the world, they are in cluster, but their examples is the way that used to evangelization. Oh my, the people. Santa Monica of Goa, it was used to be an example life of religious, not only in Asia, but in Portugal too. Yeah, the Santa Maria writing book, he said that this importance of the example to evangelization, the women, the native women. Yeah, and I have Elsa Penalva, when she studied Saint Clair Convent, she talked about a nun, Margarida. I didn't remember her name, but she was one of the founders of the convent, and she traveled a lot. She arrived from Spain to Manila to found the convent in Manila. Then she traveled to Macau to found the convent in Macau, and then she traveled into the islands closely to Macau, and she had some interactions with the native people, and she was very criticized because of this for her contemporaries, because she was an exemption of this kind, because the women can't to talk and to do sermons. So she is a good example to these exception.
Okay.
Yeah, the
Thank
circulation, women's circulation.
Yeah, we only have 5 minutes, but I have a little question to all the communications. Can I? So it's about the presence of the Inquisition. Did you find in Santa Monica, in Ajuda, in all your convents in Azores and Madeira, some testifies of the Inquisition activity? Were some nuns accused what were the reasons because of that? There were some expulsions or recommendations, special ones from the Tribunal of Santo Ofício. And I'm sorry, we have 4 minutes. I don't know who wants to begin.
I gave mine away because I have no information for that.
Yeah,
Thank
me
you.
too. In Goa, it's the same. There isn't a name that was processed in Inquisition, but the Inquisition was asked for the nuns to interfere in that conflict that I said. The nuns asked to the Inquisition to defend them against the Archbishop. So it's not unfortunately, it's not a process, but it's a communicate with this institution.
Okay. Amanda, have you some case?
No caso do Convento da Ajuda,
For the Convent of Ajuda,
não encontrei nenhum registro sobre a questão da Inquisição.
I didn't find any register about the Inquisition.
Apesar de que tanto o bispo Dom Desterro quanto Castelo Branco
Even though both the bishop, Dom Desterro e Castelo Branco,
em principal o Dom Desterro, foi bem endurecido com as freiras.
Especially Dom Desterro, he was really hardened with the nuns.
Observando tudo que elas faziam, desde o recebimento de noviças ou até mesmo o manuseio dos dotes.
So he was really keen on observing everything that they were receiving, since from the new nuns till the dowries.
Okay.
E sobre a pergunta da Francesca, né, se as freiras estavam envolvidas em evangelização.
And about the Francesca question, if the nuns were involved in the evangelization.
As freiras do Convento da Ajuda, a regra concepcionista.
So the nuns of the Convent of Ajuda, the rule was
exigia a extrema clausura.
So was demanding that the nun was in closure.
Então, por conta disso, elas não tinham essa possibilidade de evangelizar, a não ser ali dentro do convento, dentro da clausura.
So because of that, they didn't have permission to go out and do evangelism, just inside of the convent.
Okay, I must finish because we have only 1 minute, and I must congratulate all of you. And I think we have done a very good session, and it was an honor. I'm very honored to be here with you. We are equipped now, I think, to work to the future in the world of nuns, in a geographical spectrum quite interesting. Thank you, my dear all, and good work for all. And thank you for all those who are with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Professor, and thank you,
Obrigada.
colleagues.
Thank you.
Nicolo, now
thank you, Nicolo. Grazie.
Thank you, Nicolo.
Prego, have a good day.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.